All right, so we're picking up this time with the limbic system. So again, just last time we talked about the brain stem, right? The brain stem comes up, right? It consists of the medulla, breathing and heart rate. Then we have the pons, alertness and sleep. Then we have the reticular formation, which is the network of neural fibers that has to do with arousal, right? You sever your reticular formation, you go into coma, you activate your reticular formation, and you become very wide awake. Okay, and then we have the thalamus, which sits on top, and the thalamus is our sensory router. So all of our sensory information, except for smell, go through our thalamus. So now the limbic system, okay, is a bunch of, or I guess a bunch, there's three major kind of pieces of the limbic system. And again, it sits right here in the core center of your brain, okay? It's surrounded by all of this other kind of gray matter. Well, it's pink in the picture, but it's kind of what we call it, gray matter. Okay, we have our cerebellum down here. Remember, cerebellum coordinates movements. Okay, so the limbic system coordinates aggressions such as fear, emotions such as fear and aggression, basic drives such as hunger and sex, and the formation of episodic memories. Okay, so the major structures of the limbic system are our hippocampus, our amygdala, and our hypothalamus. Okay, so the hippocampus, we've heard this one before when we talked about memory, okay, processes conscious episodic memories. Okay, it works with the amygdala and to form emotionally charged memory. So remember, this is where our explicit memories are processed in our hippocampus. We saw Clive Waring, the guy with the 30-second memory. Remember, his hippocampus was damaged, so he could no longer form those explicit memories. He had no short-term memory left because he could never put anything into his long-term. Okay, and again, the amygdala, which is the purple one, sits very close next to it. So why are things like flashbulb memories and very highly emotional memories so easily put into our long term? Well, again, some of it has to do with proximity, and they work very close together. Okay, now the amygdala, again, the purple thing, consists of two lima bean-sized neural clusters, and they process emotions, especially fear and aggression. So a lot of our fight or flight response is driven through the amygdala. Now, what's really interesting about the amygdala is that when they go in and they kind of manipulate and they activate certain parts of this, if you activate a certain part of the amygdala, you seem to get the anger side of it. If you activate another side of it, you tend to get the fear side of it, and vice versa. If you damage a certain piece of it, then, sorry, my phone's ringing and it talks to us. If you damage a part of the amygdala, you lose the fear response, but you keep the anger. Okay, and vice versa. So it's really kind of interesting how it works, and some of the studies that we're doing with people who have enlarged amygdalas and things like that. All right, so talking about the amygdala in general, the electrical stimulation of a cat's amygdala provokes these aggressive reactions. So the amygdala really is our primal emotions. So when we say primal emotions, we mean, things along the lines of, rage and aggression and things that are just almost unthoughtful, like just our reactions to things. So again, like we were saying, the amygdala also does fear, though. So, when you're watching that scary movie, it's your amygdala that kind of perks everything up and says, okay, let's lower our absolute threshold and get that signal detection kicking in there so I can detect every little creak and crack of my house. So the amygdala really is a protective organ or protective structure in our brain. Now, they've done some studies on the amygdala, and they've actually found that some people have enlarged amygdala, and we see a larger portion of the population, a prison population, with an enlarged amygdala. So does that have something to do with it? It's still very correlational research, and we still don't have a lot of factual evidence to those, but we do know that the amygdala, there is something that we're looking into there. Right, so like they're saying, if you move the electrode very slightly in the cage and cage the cat with a mouse, the cat will cower in terror. So the amygdala, it's not just anger, it's not just aggression, it's also fear. All right, the hypothalamus. Now again, we talked about the hypothalamus very briefly when we talked about the pituitary gland. Remember, the hypothalamus is a structure in the limbic system that controls the pituitary gland, which is the master gland of the endocrine system. So it lies below the thalamus, thus the word hypo. Okay, it regulates body temperature and ensures adequate food and water intake, something called homeostasis. Our body likes to stay even, right? That's why, so for instance, when you have a fever, it's one of the reasons why you start to sweat, because your hypothalamus says, cool off, cool off. Or when you're cold, it's your hypothalamus that causes you to shiver to try and warm up. So it's the part of your brain that says eat, okay? So there's two parts of the hypothalamus that we're going to come back to when we start to talk about hunger motivation in a couple of units. The lateral and the ventral medial hypothalamus, one is the part of the hypothalamus that says I'm hungry, eat, and the other is the part of the hypothalamus that says I'm full, stop eating. Okay, it also tells you you're thirsty, and it is involved in the regulation of your sex drive. The hypothalamus also directs the endocrine system via the pituitary gland, like we talked about. And the hypothalamus is a reward center. So this is where kind of the pleasure reward centers of your brain are located. And they've done some really interesting studies with rats that have electrodes, electrodes attached to their hypothalamus, and then they give them food over here, and then they cross this electrified grid. Well, what they found is that when they pushed the pedal, I'm sorry, not food, I'm thinking of a different experiment, just the stimulation, that if they push the pedal, it will stimulate the electrode. Food is when we get to learning with rats and eating and stuff. So pushing the pedal that stimulated the electrode placed in the hypothalamus was more rewarding than food pellets. So what they found is that they would cross this electrified grid just to get the stimulation. Okay, so it's an interesting phenomena, because when we're talking about things like addiction, we're talking especially non-chemical addictions, things like shopping addiction, right? What causes that? Or food addiction. Well, those are also driven through our hypothalamus, because we get that reward. We get that pleasure center in our brain that tells us, hey, that was fun, that was good, I liked the way that made me feel, let me do it again. All right, so just to kind of review these brain structures, okay, these are kind of the core dedicated brain structures that we need to know, right? So at the bottom, obviously the spinal cord, right? We have our spinal cord, okay, sitting at the back of the little brain, or the back of the brain is the little brain or the cerebellum, okay? Then as we move our way up, we have the medulla, controlling heartbeat and breathing. We have the reticular formation, which controls arousal. Okay, we have the reticular formation. Where's my reticular formation? Oh, I'm sorry, no, the thalamus, which relays everything except for smell. Okay, then we have our hypothalamus underneath there, which controls maintenance and that homeostasis, an important word to make sure you know. Also, this is where the reward center of our brain is. Okay, off of the hypothalamus, we have the pituitary gland, which is the master gland of the endocrine system. Okay. Then we have, within the limbic system, we have the hippocampus, which is linked to processing memory, the amygdala, which is our primal emotions, okay, and then, oh, that was it. I think I skipped around a little. All right, so next time when we talk, we're going to talk about the cerebral cortex. Now, the cerebral cortex is basically the ultimate control and information processing center. It's everything else. Right? So all the brainstem, the limbic system, these are very dedicated structures that have very specific functions. The cerebral cortex is a little bit more of a gray area, so we'll be talking about that on the next video.